I'm John Baker of LSU Law School, and in this session, hopefully we can address that question that was raised at the end of the first session from the technical side, and that was, how do you get faculty involved? And so the thrust of this panel is to talk about the possibilities and the problems from a faculty point of view. And as is appropriate for such a thing, we will be part high-tech and part low-tech, which is the situation of most faculties. We're going to present to you briefly 3 different perspectives and then open it up, and hopefully it will be a very interactive session. First of all, we have Professor Lisle Baker of Suffolk Law School, no relationship to me, by the way, and he has a problem that very few of us have. He has a brand new state-of-the-art building in which he ordered everything he could conceive of. His problem, one that we all wish we had, is now he's trying to figure out what to do with it. Lisle is in charge of recommending to the faculty a plan of operation. At the other end of the spectrum, we have Dean Frank Newton of Texas Tech Law School, and he is a man with a plan, a very ambitious plan. But as he will tell you all about, he has faced a number of unexpected obstacles. Finally, I'll come back and maybe describe a situation that is closer to what is the situation of most in this room. You probably have some equipment, some resources, some interest, maybe a few possibilities, but no clear plan. So, Lisle, will you start us off?
Thank you, John. And is this picking up? Okay. And thank you all for taking time, especially on an empty stomach, to hear this presentation. So I will try and be as brief as I can about it. Let me begin by saying a word about Suffolk University Law School to you, because we are pleased to be honored with the opportunity to host this conference next year around this time. And I want to provide you just a brief overview of the facility, because it bears on what I'm going to say about its technical capability. So if I can pull this up successfully, we will I'll show you just a little bit about it. One of the advantages we had in putting this building together is that it is we're located right at the corner of the Boston Common, opposite the T Station, the Park Street Church. Any of you who've been to Boston know that intersection. There used to be a restaurant there. No longer. We've taken over that space, and fortunately we happened to buy the site just at the time in the 1990s when the real estate market had gone south in Boston. It's obviously gone the other direction since then. Summer in Boston has its compensations. This is the Red Sox, who are on a roll right now, the Duck Tours, which don't sink as far as we know, Lobster, you can see Old Ironsides. The main attraction, however, is our new building, and it's named after our former dean and now sitting president. There's a certain advantage in that, I think, in that you tend to be able to make a case for virtually anything you want. Not that he's not careful about it, but we doubled our square footage. We have 18 classrooms, 12 meeting rooms, 7 computer labs, 300 Pentium PCs, 3 moot court rooms, 2,600 live internet connections, and a 3-story library. Now, I should point out that the technology in this building began when our former law librarian, Ed Bander, offered his office as our first computer lab about 12 years ago. And then moved into what was the functional equivalent of a closet. And our librarians since then, including Betsy McKenzie, who is here today, have really been wonderfully helpful to all of us in this area. It's really quite a striking building, designed by Troy Kobus and Associates. We came here and looked at what Chicago Kent had done. We're very proud of what you have done here, and we've tried to adapt that to our uses. We have classrooms. We looked all over the country for classroom models that we could emulate, and actually ended up going across the river to the Harvard Business School, because we found that they had the most successful design in terms of providing an opportunity for students to see each other. This is the teacher workstation. I'm going to talk a little more about that shortly. A computer lab, our media control room, which is sort of the nerve center of all this media operation I'll describe in a minute. our moot court room, which allows the judge to see things and project things, and the audience who are watching and the teaching to go on in a way that enables people to see what the advocates are doing. And it's quite a handsome facility. The Moakley Library, named after Congressman Joe Moakley, a graduate of our institution who has been very helpful to us. Anyway, we hope to see you in June of 2000. Now, what I would like to do also is to talk a little bit more about the tradition of the school and how this technological opportunity grew. We started as really an evening law school completely. It was there's a plaque on our old building that indicates it was founded by a fellow named Gleason Archer in his living room, dedicated to the study of those who, dedicated to those who must study, if at all, by night. We have the largest evening. We have the largest evening division in the country, I think, 800 students. I think we are probably the 6th largest day school in the country. We have 1,700 law students, so we're a big operation. But the basic model that we tried to do was, and I owe John Mayer for personal debt of thanks, because I was chairman of the building committee, then chairman of the subcommittee of the building committee on technology, and now I'm chairman or co-chairman of the technology and legal education committee. I've been trying to get out of my job all along, but haven't been successful. Anyway, John's initial thoughts were very helpful to us, and we have tried to make it possible to bring video data and voice into the building virtually at any point in the process and bring it into the classroom. We have a media center and a media services center where we can bring anything that's DVD, audio, videotape, archived classes, satellite distribution, video conferencing. We have a capability virtually throughout the building on at least a portable basis and in one room specifically designed for it. The classroom I want to point out to you so that if you take advantage of our facility next summer, each of these classrooms, especially the tiered classrooms, worked very hard to make them so that the distance learning experience of being in the back was at least as successful as being in the front. We also tried to make the school as much a professional environment. I think in the process of thinking about technology, we wanted to make sure that we captured some of the cooperative spirit that we have among our students and also the kind of professionalism that we hope we inculcate. So we tried to make this a very nice space. And for example, this is a small matter, but you'll notice that each of those chairs is individual. They're not fixed. They're not in a situation where the chair is designed to fit one size and not you. These chairs are individually adjustable, and that makes it an easier operation. The media head end here has 10 VHS decks. We're staying for the moment with analog material. We can go to digital if we want to, but I'll explain a little bit about that. We've got what is called a Synergy control system. It's a computer-driven software program that allows us to send video anywhere in the building from any source. 18 cassette decks to take care of audio recording if we want to deal with that or use that. Video conferencing capability. And it's all built into a teacher workstation. The teacher workstation has a flat panel monitor, over on the right a document camera, and in the center something called a touch panel, as well as a Pentium computer, which is got built into each of these teaching stations, so that we have the capability to bring video, computer material, virtually anything from anywhere, and send it into the classroom. That's not necessarily distance learning, but it is, I think, a very interesting way to use the media capabilities. Each of these touch panels that you see here can be, they're color-coded so that if you want to do video, you can control that, sort of like controlling a VCR. We have a camera control, so you can control what's being recorded in the room, and you can pan in certain parts of the room or focus in. The computer control allows you to take what's on the computer, go to the web, throw that up on the screen, deal with it as part of the information in the class. The document camera allows you to take overheads or hard objects and show them if you'd like to do that. There was one button up the top, I hope I should mention briefly, call media services, so that when you can't figure this out, we have standby capability upstairs, plus a telephone in each room, so that when it doesn't work, you can holler for help. Computer lab, Lexus training lab, everybody's got these days. High-speed network. Gina Gaffney, our computer resource director, is here, and she understands what this stuff does. I don't. The high-speed network is important. We have a network port and power supply at every seat, and including the seats in the library. That's what I mean. Each of the seats is wired. Again, John Mayer had recommended this to us at the beginning, and we did it. Our moot court room is a teaching classroom, as I indicated before. We're trying to use video conferencing. We're just starting with it because our new video conferencing teaching room is still being fitted out even as we speak. But we do have this portable unit, and the distance learning classroom itself has 3 cameras in it, each of which can be mobilized by the instructor. This is the touch panel in that room. I won't go through all the details of it, but a student who wants to get a chance to speak would press a button. That mic then can become live at the instructor's choice. This is a touch panel that allows the instructor to use that. In terms of the process that you're talking about, how do you get faculty involved with this? We have just tried to get some faculty who are interested in using PowerPoint or various other technologies to try it out and then show this at other faculty at faculty meetings as a way of getting started. I'm just going to show you a couple of things. We've got a cyber law class that's all on the web with one of our adjunct faculty. We've got one of my colleagues, Professor Mike Avery, is here. He's done a very interesting presentation on excessive force claims, and this is a kind of information you can present visually that has a little more impact than just talking about it. And also, you know, when you read things and take them out of context, this is how a quotation can have quite a bit more impact. You want to just take a moment and read that. Now, I don't mean to be gruesome about it, but it does tend to bring home an issue legally that a lot of students may not grasp quite as readily without doing that. You can diagram. You all know how to do this stuff. This is one of my colleagues who's done some work with the SEC to try and explain all of how to solve those problems of offerings. We've used Web Course in a Box for the Legal Practice Skills program. And basically, these are just little slides that we've developed to try and illustrate for faculty things that they can think about to try out. We have our media services group, our computer services group, and then I'm co-chair of the technology committee that works on trying to integrate all of this stuff. And I would say that one of our challenges that we are working very hard on here is to, as we get more sophisticated with our capability, and we've tried to really constitute, as far as we know, the state of the art in this area, that we also try and maintain as much of the basic humanity that we care about as lawyers. In a way, I've argued in this conference before, and I will continue to argue, that the more technologically sophisticated we become, in some ways, the more important it is to work on developing the human skills and the skills of human interaction that really make for good lawyering. And the one thought I would leave you with as we think about distance education and what it means, of all the professions I know, only lawyers divide the world into lawyers and non-lawyers. They're not lawyers and non-doctors, I mean doctors and non-doctors, engineers and non-engineers, but everybody here has heard that phrase and made that distinction. And I think if we think very hard about that, it may help illuminate some of the intangibles and issues that we want to make sure we preserve for the better of our profession and for the quality of service to our clients and to our communities. And we're just very privileged to have this wonderful new playpen, or whatever you would like to call it, within which to work and to teach our students, and we hope all of you will come see it for yourselves next summer. Thank you very much.
My name is Frank Newton, and I come to tell you a little bit about some of the problems that can be encountered between the path of technological possibility to the political reality of American legal education. I left this conference a year ago delighted because we had come up with a plan that we were interested in implementing in the state of Texas to provide opportunities for students to study law in sections of our state that were underserved and that did not currently provide access for students. And after this conference, I was confident that by this time we would be reporting on the first such operation. The idea really was simple. In the state of Texas, we have both geographical problems and, since the Fifth Circuit's decision in Hopwood, problems relating to diversity. The distance problems have to do with locations such as El Paso, Texas, a metropolitan area with almost 6 million people on both sides of the border, no law school, and no law schools within 300-mile distance. We have similar problems in South Texas, an area with about 3 million people in a heavily concentrated area, and 2 metropolitan areas of which are now in the 10 fastest growing in the United States, but also over 200 miles from an existing law school. Because of the Hopwood decision, none of the schools in the state of Texas are permitted to offer scholarships based purely on ethnicity, which has made us the happy hunting ground for recruiters in law schools throughout the United States. But it also meant that we were developing graduates who did not represent the public that they would be serving, number one. And number two, that there were concentrations of population not being served. Third, and this related to the people that we visited with, many of the people in these underserved areas had the kind of family connections which meant going away for long periods of time to law schools was virtually impossible. What most often occurred was that we had double career members who were first-generation graduates of colleges and universities who had been encouraged to go into teaching, who were teaching in our public schools, but where at least one member of the family had an interest in obtaining a professional education, but who were disquieted about either interrupting the family for 3 years or being physically required to pick up and move the family. So what we proposed was something very simple. We proposed to have the first 2 years of law school as a part-time program in El Paso and in Edinburgh, Texas, which is in the Valley. We were proposing to put our faculty on 12-month contracts and ship faculty members from Lubbock, where we have only a full daytime program in a city of 200,000, to teach in the summer programs in the remote cities, to bring those faculty members to teach in our summer program in Lubbock, and through this process to also add 1/3 of the courses through interactive video between those two sites. Two quick things, if I may, first about the ABA and then about state politics, and then you'll know some of the problems on the downside. In 1995, we had wired our building and put 300 carrels in for a student body of 600, all of which are outfitted with terminals, and hardwired all the classrooms and set them up for distance learning. That proved less expensive and less of a technological challenge than we thought. We actually have operated both on a state backbone on T1 as well as commercial lines from both of those sites to our locations with virtually no difficulties. Having said all of that, let me talk to you about two of the problems. The first one is that we had asked the ABA to work with us in this project and brought Jim White to visit and to consult with us along the way. Initially, Jim said this would constitute only a need for a variance, which means we would just submit information as an ABA-approved school about a programmatic variance, and it would be considered by the committee. When we actually reached the stage of making the submission, the committee, after looking at it, said, no, this really isn't a variance. You're going to have a site inspection. And the reason for that is an interpretation under our existing interim program for distance learning opportunities for ABA-approved law schools, which is essentially this. Whatever facilities you have for your regular students, you must have for all of your students. So the ABA is firmly in the mortar as opposed to the click stance in terms of doing this. And that includes gymnasium facilities, physical libraries, child care, access to intramural sports, parking, bookstores, etc. We actually were not too worried about that because we had agreed to pair with existing state-supported universities, the University of Texas at El Paso in El Paso, and Pan American University at Edinburgh in the Valley. In both of those cases, the libraries were willing to accept collections. In both of those cases, we actually had people donate to these projects the minimum requirement for physical on-shelf collections at those libraries. People are getting rid of books, not buying more books. So we actually had reached the stage where the minimum library requirement was obtained without too much difficulties. Both of those schools had agreed to employ law school librarians with appropriate training to be available at all of those sources. And at each of those schools, we intended to have tenured faculty members available on site for those students. Unfortunately, after we got into the late, and we also went through, there's a coordinating board in the state of Texas that has to approve all higher education. We went through them. Unfortunately, at the point of funding, my state senator, a graduate of my school, developed trepidation about being in a partnership with other state institutions controlled by separate boards of regents, and prevented implementation of that program in the fall of this year. We're going back into a legislative session. There is legislative interest in doing something like this. Now, it is important for you to know we intended to limit these students to 25 a year. They were on a set curriculum. They went year-round for 2 years. The third year, they would have come to our school for the third year, for one calendar year, both summer sessions and the regular session, and then would have been eligible to sit for the bar exam. Programs of cooperation aside, and it is a real problem because of the politics involved. Actually, we got shot down because we have a cooperative program with the University of Texas in the medical school area. They got to fighting about the tobacco money that had been received, part of which was funneled to medical education, and fighting over the tobacco money shot down the cooperative project. But I just want to close by saying, if I may, 3 points that we've learned that I want to leave with you on the problem side. There have been a lot of questions about faculty. In this case, our faculty would have been required not only to use technology, but to go into a process that would have required them to spend summers in El Paso or Edinburgh on a fairly regular basis. Moving from a 9-month contract to a 12-month contract both pays the faculty and saves the state money, or would save a private school money in terms of delivery of legal education. One of the things we've never done is be very efficient. I've never understood why we didn't work 12 months out of the year. And so you've got to be prepared to look at some of that. I asked faculty, we voted on this on a 2/3 consensus and got a 2/3 vote in favor of it, and then asked faculty to volunteer, and we had plenty of volunteers. So if the money goes with it, it seems to me that's the inducement to do it. Number two, it really is the case that both central universities and the ABA have sufficient commitment to the bricks part that programs which are most likely, in my opinion, to be successful initially do still have the brick and mortar component. There's just an add-on. Number three, the interest of the general public and students were overwhelming. The reaction in our state by editorial comments and among politicians as well as prospective students when the program was delayed for at least a year was overwhelming. So there is a substantial pent-up market. In our case, what we were seeking to do is to run an evening program where it was needed, but at a level that otherwise would not have been economically feasible, as a way of providing access to legal education for an underserved and very worthwhile group. We still remain optimistic, but I am living proof that technology may not be the ultimate problem. Accreditations and alumni and state legislatures may be the biggest stumbling block. Thank you.
As you can see, Suffolk and Texas Tech really are at the cutting edge on trying to move forward in this area, but most law schools are not in a position anywhere near this. And why is it that distance education in the legal arena is so different from what's going on elsewhere in the universities? There are right now 52,000 courses online in the United States from universities and community colleges, and you heard reference to the Western Governors University, but there's also other virtual universities. The Southern Regional Electronic Campus is growing quite large. And all of this is going on, and to understand, I think, the question, or the answer to the question, how do we get faculty motivated? In part, I think you have to look at what is it that's motivating this move elsewhere. And I think that Dan Hunter certainly sketched much of this in terms of e-commerce. And if you look at what's happening at universities, generally it is administration-driven and or driven by state governors in certain cases. And you will find that there are basically 4 reasons that people are doing this, and that almost none of them, at least at this point, apply to law schools. First of all, quote, the first reason is that everyone's doing it. That is outside of law schools. Inside of law schools, not everyone's doing it. And so we don't have this kind of competitive and fear-driven motive that many schools have, especially those that rely on, as many private schools do, on the funds generated not only from law schools but from their business schools. And so when private schools found out a few years ago that business schools from different parts of the country were going to electronically set up shop in their backyard, they literally went into panic. And places like, especially the University of Phoenix, certainly, as we heard last year, sent a panic through everyone. I know our president came into the law school and he said each time he came in to talk to us, he started out, "We're not afraid of the University of Phoenix." Okay? Why are you talking about it then? The second thing is that they thought that there was this possibility of avoiding costs for buildings and land. But as many of them have found out, there are many other costs. The electronic plant, as it is called, as opposed to the physical plant, is something that they never counted on or didn't realize the extent of the costs, or how quickly electronics become outdated as opposed to a building becoming outdated. You will hear later on in this conference from some of the providers who actually come in and sell universities on their outsourcing, eCollege, Blackboard, and there are about 4 or 5 others who do this because universities have figured this out that they can't really handle this. And that is leading to a large part of universities outsourcing what they're doing, and that is part of the disintegrating of universities. As far as sources of income go, law schools certainly would like more income, but really not at the expense of expanding enrollments to a great extent, as was discussed by Dan Hunter and others. That is, there are some places, especially maybe Suffolk, which started out as a night law school, and they want to expand in that area, but many law schools have deliberately avoided the night law school track, and we limit the numbers that we take in, and even though enrollment or applications are declining, there's no indication that we really want to have 5,000 student law schools, although maybe that's the direction that Concord's headed in. So those 4 reasons that are driving other schools really don't, at this point, apply to law schools. And the key, as Dean Newton pointed out, is really accreditation. As long as that accreditation barrier is there, you're not going to see a rush into this. But that accreditation barrier is not going to hold indefinitely. It will be broken. And so the question is not when will it change, but merely the pace at which it will change. And we heard predictions from Dan, and we've had it the last 2 years at the ALS meetings on when things would radically change in law schools. So what do you do in the interim if you're either a faculty member or a technical member of the staff trying to motivate faculty to get involved in some way and make sure that you're preparing at least at some pace in order to get this done? Even though in many universities the motivation is top-down driven, the administration is driving it, much of the best work is really bottom-up work. And that is individual professors who decide to do this and come up with creative programs or solutions. And so why is it, or what would motivate, or what are the problems for motivating? One of the big things that universities have found is that unless you're terribly creative and automatically interested in this, when you get into it, it's an awful lot of work doing a distance learning course. And it's not just that it's work of the kind that you're used to. It is a different method of teaching. And it differs depending upon whether you're doing online work or whether you're doing video conference work or, as will be in the case in the future, multimedia work. The question I wanted to ask Peter Martin but didn't get a chance to is, did he notice that there was a difference in his voice when he was speaking to us as opposed to when he gave his canned piece? There was a noticeable difference in his inflection. And the inflection, I would suggest, was much better when he was talking to us than it was when he had this pre-prepared thing. And that's because unless you've done time on radio or television and you're used to speaking to a blank screen where there's no set of eyeballs to look at you, you don't get the human interaction. And all of this, I think, needs to be explored, and there were good questions trying to explore it, but the reality is you can't explore it too far until you try to experience it. It is a different experience. So there has to be some initial motivation, and many of the schools have found the motivation simply by surprise paying people more money to do this or giving them some kind of a reward. In my own case, the motivation is a little bit different. I was from the 60s kind of a great fan of Marshall McLuhan and his notion about the medium is the message, and I happened to meet with him and study under one of his co-authors, and technology and its impact on the law is something that I got to talk to McLuhan about. And I started out with, a crazy idea 25 years ago, cameras in the courtroom. Now we know that cameras in the courtroom have had some impact. And we saw in the presentation of Suffolk that really the technological creation that they have there integrates the high-tech courtroom and distance learning. All of this is really of the same piece. And whether you're talking about multimedia, video conferencing, and the internet in the courtroom or the classroom, there are many similarities in this area. So there are different ways to get into this, and many schools are getting electronic courtrooms, and all will eventually have them. Our students need to get into this. They need to be introduced to it because all of the federal courthouses in the country are getting at least one electronic courtroom, and students have to be able to function. And right now the courts are, in fact, training lawyers, but they're going to expect that we will have trained them electronically to be able to walk into a federal courthouse. The means. There's been a lot of discussion about online and some discussion of video conferencing. I got into it largely through video conferencing, through an interest 10 years ago where I did conferencing via satellite. I taught a course via satellite and could see that it was inadequate because it was not interactive visually. It was interactive in audio but not visual. But then about 5 years ago, PictureTel and others came up with compressed video. And we at the law school had dumped on us, nobody requested it, $100,000 worth of equipment simply because every campus in the state was getting this equipment and we were a campus, so we got the equipment. And they have completely wired the whole state with high-speed lines. And they've done this in order to cut costs and increase enrollments per classroom in the various dispersed classrooms around the state. But we have no use for it in the law school at this point, so I've been the only one using it. But it's interesting for those in the IT who want to know how you get faculty involved. What I've gone about doing is trying to educate the students and other faculty members, and they really enjoy it. The first time I did it was simply, it was a matter of convenience. I was out of town, I needed to meet a class, so I got a video conference site and I taught the class from afar. The only problem was the students, when they saw themselves on camera, thought they were on television and they froze. It is a great tool for enrichment. Some of the law schools already are using video conferencing, have been for a number of years, for placement. Firms that won't interview elsewhere at certain law schools will sometimes interview via video conferencing, and I know a number of law schools have this. But you can do it for enrichment. I brought in the Deputy Director of the European Union, and we had him via video conferencing, and we had 3 classes come together, and 2 faculty members and myself sat there, and they got to exchange with him, and they came out fired up about doing more distance learning. We've also used it as a way of educating lawyers about what's going on. We've set up depositions for lawyers who had witnesses to depose in London and in Hong Kong, and they come out of it charged up and hopefully more willing to open up their donation to the law school for multimedia rooms and high-tech equipment. Each school has to look at its own possibilities. Dean Newton sketched, I think, very well a situation that is heavily dependent on geography in Texas. Many schools have the possibility of using it for CLE. It's a natural. We haven't used it yet because we have a regulatory roadblock in our state that doesn't allow accreditation for it yet. We also have a number of partnerships abroad, and I teach at Lyon in France, and I'm trying to get them, and they've agreed to wire their new building, and as soon as they get the equipment, I can do it on a more spread out basis rather than going over for a week at a time and a week at a time. It would be more effective to teach over there to them 1 week at a time. There are a number of issues, though, when you get faculty thinking about all this, and a lot of that's already been referred to as the Arthur Miller problem, and we talked about that last year when Charles Neeson was here. There are real issues in universities about who's going to control all of this. And I gave a talk on this to deans of schools of art back in October, and afterward our art school dean called me up and he said, you know, I want to talk to you, and we had lunch, and he said, we were planning to go forward with this big distance learning multimedia project, and then somebody said, who owns this? And we've decided to hold off to see who owns this. And the university hasn't laid out clear guidelines. People are faced with this question on the other side of the university, and it was raised by Dan Hunter. If I create these courses, and they're in videotape, and they're on the web, am I working myself out of a job? But the other side of this is, am I working myself into an ongoing royalty if I own at least a substantial chunk of the rights of this thing, so that it's when it's repeated that I get a royalty so that I'm not obsolete? And that's a question, I think, that needs more attention. Thank you. We're open for questions, comments. People want to go to lunch. Question up here.